Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, I'm going to tell you the truth. Today, I'm in a kind of a jaunty mood, and I'm wearing a bow tie. Inflation is down. Gas prices are down. Mortgage rates are the lowest they have been in decades. America has taken in billions of dollars through the president's tariff negotiations. And we've passed the largest tax cut in American history, or extended it, actually. We have passed extraordinary regulatory cuts. I'm also confident once Jerome Too Late Powell is no longer the head of the Federal Reserve, we'll get a non-political Federal Reserve and we'll get a deeper cut in interest rates. Jerome Powell, yet again, according to the Wall Street Journal, ignoring intense pressure from the Trump administration, refuses yet again a deeper cut in interest rates that would really spur the housing market. But the truth is that Powell is the one who's acting politically. In other words, the Federal Reserve Board is supposed to take into consideration the inflation rate and the unemployment rate in the country as the markers as to whether they should cut rates. And inflation and unemployment today are lower than they were when Jerome Powell issued a deep interest rate cut to try to reelect Joe Biden. Of course, it didn't work. Biden subsequently ran out of the race. But so I'm optimistic that we'll get a rate cut and that there'll be a booming economy by the time 2026 rolls around. The economy is already improving dramatically, but it will only get better, which is a great backdrop. But so on days like this, I wear a bow tie. Now, there's a number of rules about wearing a bow tie. It's interesting that studies that were done by Reader's Digest back in the 50s showed an analysis of television viewers. People have less tendency to believe a person wearing a bow tie, so it has kind of a Carney Barker quality to it. But New York Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, one of the great intellectuals, a man who served in the Nixon administration, was really the architect of Nixon's urban policy to rebuild the cities. He also famously wrote that the civil rights movement would benefit from a period of benign neglect. And he was part of the team that helped under Nixon, along with Attorney General John Mitchell and then Secretary, I believe, of Commerce, George Shultz, later would become Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan, that America's public schools were desegregated. Moynihan then returned to New York. He was imported actually ambassador to India. And he was known for his personal style. Earlier in his career, he had run for the New York City Council presidency and been defeated. Then he hooked up with Nixon, but he returned to Harvard and he returned to New York and won a U.S. Senate seat. He moved more sharply to the left later and didn't want to talk too much about his experience in the Nixon administration, but he was a big thinker. The Grand Central Station, the old post office becoming the new train station for New York, the Daniel Patrick Moynihan Station is, of course, one of his better ideas. He was a big thinker, but he did a great video, which you can probably still find on YouTube, of how to tie a bow tie, because it's amazing how many gentlemen don't know how to actually tie a bow tie. There's two things you don't want to do. You never, under any circumstances, do you want to wear a clip-on bow tie. And then secondarily, of course, there are the type that have a kind of a strap and a snap. Those are acceptable, but not laudable. But you really want to tie your own bow tie, and it's exactly the same as tying your shoe. There's one other good thing about it, and that is you literally never can get soup on your bow tie. So I wear them from time to time when I'm in a good mood. One thing that improved my mood is the fact that the FBI carried out a stunning raid, and a search of the Fulton County, Georgia election warehouse, seizing an extraordinary number of 2020 election materials, a move that shows that the Trump administration is quite serious on combating election fraud. Now, I've seen voices on the left say that there was no probable cause, and this has all been investigated before, and it's a canard, and all of that is false. It's interesting that Fulton County election authorities only weeks ago, in a sworn statement before a hearing of the Georgia State Election Board, a Fulton County attorney by the name of Ann Brumbaugh acknowledged on behalf of the county that they did not dispute the fact that more than 130 tabulator tapes, that's approximately 350 early in-person voters, lacked the required signatures from poll managers and witnesses. This is a violation of state law relating to certification tapes printed from ballot scanners, which must be signed in order to be verified and therefore counted. They've tried to downplay this as a clerical or an administrative order, but it is certainly leads to substantial evidence that there are problems both with the paper ballots, but I think there's also potentially problems in Georgia with the electronic voting machines. Now, of course, critics point to President Donald Trump's famous conversation with Secretary of State Raffensperger, and there are at least 7 other state and Trump lawyers on the line. And if you read the entire transcript rather than just the line, Trump makes the case, since he has theoretically lost the state by 11,000 votes, that they have already inadvertently or advertently counted 300,000 illegal votes, and if you deduct those, Trump wins. So he doesn't tell them to go manufacture votes. He tells them what the margin is. That has been widely, of course, distorted in the reporting. But what's more important to understand is the Fulton County received a subpoena from the Department of Justice 2 times. They were first asked in October of 2020. Then again, 2 weeks ago, the FBI delivered a third letter demanding this material, and the Fulton County Board of Elections just ignored those federal requests. State board elections have been trying for 4 years to get the records, including issuing subpoenas for the ballots and other records. All of those efforts have failed until today. Julie Adams, who's one of the Republicans on the Fulton County Board, says she applauds Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel, but this is encouraging because also on the ground was Tulsi Gabbard, who is the Director of National Intelligence. Now, President Trump has charged Tulsi Gabbard with examining all aspects of election integrity, including the reliability and the manipulability and the security of electronic voting machines, which is the other part of this. Now, as I reported here in the Stone Zone, Gabbard has been somewhat retarded in her efforts by some in the government, principally I think at the Central Intelligence Agency, who don't really want to examine the technology which I believe has ultimately been used to manipulate foreign elections. It's very notable that Director of National Intelligence was on the ground. It's important to recognize how close this election in Georgia was. Georgia was decided by fewer than 12,000 ballots, and Fulton County has certified that more than 300,000 votes were illegal. She was spotted at the scene along with the FBI agents. Now, Gabbard has made rooting out election fraud and bringing justice to the fraudsters a cornerstone of her operation at DNI. Democrat officials in Fulton County immediately expressed alarm, claiming they did not know why the ballots would be taken, even though they had been asked for them twice by subpoena, and feigning ignorance. But I don't think this will shield them from the justice they so richly deserve. This search follows a Justice Department lawsuit seeking Fulton County election records from local officials who they have repeatedly, once again, refused to comply with subpoenas from Georgia's state election board. So for years, Americans were told to stop asking questions, move along, nothing to see here. Those days, I think, have come to an end. I believe that there is also very substantial evidence of manipulability by both the Chinese and the Venezuelans. It is reported that in a series of emails between the company Smartmatic, based in Venezuela, to Sequoia voting system employees based in the U.S. that provided instructions for the installation of the remote access server that allows the manipulation of the totals. That is very serious evidence put forward by Patrick Byrne, formerly the chief executive officer of a number of very important Wall Street companies. And then you have the other question, which is more concerning to me, and that pertains to a voting system known as Conic, which is a Michigan-based company, but had a contract for the Los Angeles County. Conic's software, called Police Chief, was used to scheduling and manning poll workers and others. In 2022, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office accused Conic's CEO, a Chinese by the name of Eugene Yu, of violating the county contract by storing sensitive poll worker data and other voter data on servers in China and allowing Chinese contractors to access it. Rather than arrest Mr. Yu immediately, my friends over at True the Vote were briefly jailed over this question. Conic software did not directly handle voter tabulation, according to AI search I did, and the prosecutor stated that it had no impact on the election, but I think this requires much closer scrutiny. The charges were later dropped against the whistleblowers, and Conic paid a $5 million fine. So I do think you have serious evidence of both Venezuelan and Chinese interference in the election, but Donald Trump himself has said it loud and clear. We've got them, he has said. We have the evidence, both on paper ballots and it comes to the machines. And now we will see, despite the efforts by the Central Intelligence Agency, what I think is to try to suppress the electronic voting machine part of this, we will now see the deep flaws in Georgia's election. And to me, that is very good news indeed, Tulsi Gabbard proving that there's more than one way to skin a cat. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate those warm words from Vice President J.D. Vance. I saw the Vice President yesterday in Naples, Florida, had a brief conversation with him. He gave a terrific talk to about 22 donors in a private event. And he's very realistic about 2026. The Republican Party has recognized that there are Republican voters and then there are Trump voters, those voters who turn out in presidential years, and they are very much still for Donald Trump, but they don't turn out in off-year elections. That is one of the great challenges that faces Republicans in 2026. And, of course, those are the very voters who want to see accountability and justice in the Russian collusion hoax, the greatest single dirty trick in American politics, the abuse of power in which Barack Obama and Joe Biden and particularly John Brennan, the CIA director, James Comey, the FBI director, Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, Robbie Mook, I love that name, Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, Andrew Weissman, Andrew McCabe, and, of course, Robert Mueller himself, all perpetrated one of the greatest hoaxes in American history on the American people. They want to see justice and accountability there. No, not revenge and retaliation. The people broke laws and the Constitution in their manic effort to destroy Donald Trump and his second bid for the presidency. Then they ought to be held accountable. And, of course, Arctic frost is the frosting on the cake, if you will, and an extra constitutional effort by Jack Smith to invent crimes against Donald Trump. Oh, you formed an alternative elector slate in a disputed election. Again, not illegal, or that the president was responsible for violence on January 6th, after they, of course, deleted the public comments where he called for his supporters to march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol. So those are two of the cornerstones of mobilizing those Trump voters. If we do not keep faith with those voters, I think it is less likely that they turn out. And then secondarily, a very shrewd understanding by the vice president of the fact that elections are largely settled by domestic issues: the cost of groceries, the cost of gasoline, the cost and availability of housing, which is coming on strong as a growing issue for the American people, the availability of jobs, unemployment remains low, the inflation rate, which remains low. So the fundamentals are all there, and the vice president very much understands what has to be done between now and the midterm elections. I was very, very impressive in his clear understanding. Now, under the kind of the old rules, the party in power always loses seats in both houses in an off-year election. But I would argue we never had a businessman as president before. Nobody has ever, only one person has been elected president, lost re-election in a disputed re-election, and come back to win the White House. That was Grover Cleveland. Other than that, then Donald Trump was the only other individual. So the point is that the old rules don't necessarily hold, and they certainly don't hold when it comes to Donald Trump. Trump's endorsement of the Republican Party is lethal. I mean, it's extraordinarily effective. Reagan was very popular, but even his endorsement did not carry this kind of punch. And all of the polls, even those that purport that the president's overall approval or job approval rating has dipped a bit, they fail to look at the fact that when you look at the Trump base, both the Republican base, but more precisely the Trump base, they approve at high levels with his efforts to remove dangerous illegal criminals from the country. They're happy with his trade and tax policies. They're happy with his limited use of power in Venezuela and in Iran without committing us to boots in the ground in a long, endless foreign war. So I think Trump is on track. And that the golden age that he promised us, an age of peace, prosperity, security, and justice.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
All eyes remain focused, of course, on Minnesota. But those who say that Donald Trump has somehow folded or that he has capitulated or that he blinked must not have read the list of demands he gave Tim Walz. That he and the governor have a dialogue is a good thing, and I note that the Minnesota State Police today, for the first time, are out there protecting ICE and Border Patrol agents who are doing their jobs. On the other hand, I do think that there's a recalibration. The ICE agents are more experienced, have more training, they have greater depth in law enforcement, where some of the Border Patrol agents have lesser training, and I think that has created some very bad optics. On the other hand, in Minnesota, those who have been detained for deportation, 80% of them, 78%, 78 and a fraction, are criminals. They have a criminal record either in their country of origin or here in the United States. Some of them are facing criminal charges here. So this idea that Donald Trump's Gestapo is just snatching U.S. citizens and kidnapping children is a false narrative. But at the same time, the resistance is not some indigenous, spontaneous groundswell. The signal chats that have been uncovered showing the precision operation to impede federal law enforcement officers in the performance of their duties is, to me, a conspiracy to insurrection. The fact that you have a tracking of federal agents reporting their license plate number, reporting that information to cadres of thugs who then show up for the arrests. On the other hand, sources tell me that in the case of Alex Priddy, it was supposed to be the policy that in any arrest there'd be 3 ICE agents and 3 Border Patrol agents, but based on my research, the crew that got into the scrape in which the far left activist Alex Priddy was ultimately shot and killed in a hostile confrontation. I think most of those agents were Border Patrol agents. I think this is why the president fired this official Bovino. It's why he also sent Tom Homan, who has a relationship with both the governor and the mayor, not a good one. I think there's greater flexibility, I'm told, by the governor. The mayor is more hardline. He has two-word answers for any attempt to have dialogue with the Trump administration. But as far as the event with Alex Priddy, I'm reminded of the Japanese movie Rashomon. I mean, speaking yesterday to Mark Caputo of Axios, who's a very precise and I think balanced reporter, one of the few that comes to the craft of journalism without a bias. There aren't many of them. There are a handful. He has looked at the video over and over again and says that Priddy, who was armed when he tried to interfere with an ongoing arrest, did not unholster his gun. On the other hand, I've seen the video that Alex Jones and many others put up, and I clearly see him reaching for his gun. But that narrative got disturbed enormously when newly released video showed that Priddy was in a hostile confrontation with federal agents 11 days before he was fatally shot by the Border Patrol in Minneapolis. That footage, which was independently obtained and confirmed as authentic by family members, showed Priddy yelling at immigration officers, spitting, flipping them the middle finger, kicking the rear of a federal agent's SUV, even breaking a taillight before officers tackled him to the ground. So this flies in the face of the fake news narrative that Alex Priddy was just a peaceful protester who meant no harm to anyone. Anyone who brings a loaded gun and 2 additional rounds of ammunition to the site of the arrest of an illegal is sadly looking for trouble. Priddy did have a concealed carry permit in the state of Minnesota, but under state law, he was supposed to be requiring ID, and he had no ID on him, which shows a certain premeditation, I'm afraid. He was killed by federal agents on January 24th during that immigration enforcement operation downtown Minneapolis while resisting and carrying a firearm. Now, the left seeks to make him the next George Floyd. They're trying to make him an angel, but this new video doesn't really fit that narrative. This comes amidst the backdrop of continued leftist resistance against Operation Metro Surge, which is the Trump-backed effort to enforce federal immigration laws in cities where local authorities have resisted cooperation. So in other words, put it another way, why do we see no reports of problems like we see in Minnesota, in Texas, or in Florida, or in other red states where state and local law enforcement cooperate with ICE and the Border Patrol as they carry out their duties? Overall, nationally, 70% of those who have been detained have criminal histories. So the narrative that we are just grabbing anybody who is dark complected and trying to arrest them, of course, is entirely and completely false. But that is, of course, the narrative of the far left. We've seen this script before. The fake news sets the narrative of a communist or a street thug or a drug abuser as an innocent victim. They die or are killed during an encounter with law enforcement, and then the public is ginned up into a frenzy before all of the facts can really be known. The truth of the matter is that this fellow Alex Priddy was a foot soldier for the rise of modern-day Bolshevism. He was in that signal chat, mobilizing people to interfere with the legitimate duties of federal officers. These Marxist forces are operating, as James O'Keefe has demonstrated to us, with a military precision. James O'Keefe attested from his embedding, they're well-funded, they're well-trained, they're backed by institutional power, and they're extremely dangerous, and they're very, very well-coordinated. I find it troubling that the lieutenant governor of Minnesota and Governor Tampon Tim Walz, his chief political operative and campaign manager, seem to be the administrator of at least one, if not 2, of these signal groups, which are now under federal investigation, according to FBI Director Kash Patel. So I think the president is moving to calibrate, but for those who say that he's thrown in the towel, well, they have not seen, quite obviously, the conditions President Trump gave the governor. He demanded immediate cooperation from state and local police. He demanded that all illegals currently held in Minnesota or local jails be turned over immediately to ICE. He demanded that any new illegal arrested on a new charge be remanded immediately to ICE, and he demanded that when the lives of ICE agents are imperiled because of thuggery, organized thuggery, that local police act in concert with ICE, not stand by idly and see people killed. This whole movement to kind of recast what is happening in Minnesota is a very, very dangerous game. The president has laid out his requirements, but whether Tim Walsh or more precisely the governor Jacob Fry will comply with them, I think is highly unlikely. And the president, of course, continues to have the nuclear option, which of course is the Insurrection Act of 1807. That means that instead of dealing with ICE agents or the Border Patrol, this insurrection would now be faced by our military, the people who pulled off the stunning arrest in Minnesota. They don't make errors. That was a precision military operation. Meanwhile, protesters gathered Tuesday afternoon outside Governor Walsh's office, the state capitol, chanting anti-law enforcement slogans just hours before Walsh met with the Trump border czar, Tom Homan, and spoke directly on the phone with the president. The crowd shouted phrases like justice delayed, justice denied, held signs demanding justice for Alex Priddy. You see, they're trying to dress this communist foot soldier who was shot dead while violently and while armed, resisting law enforcement in the streets, along with openly displaying vulgar and obscene anti-ICE messaging outside the governor's office. This is, of course, a familiar sight in Democrat-run cities where radical activists increasingly target law enforcement for simply doing their jobs and create as much political pressure as possible on elected officials to keep them paralyzed and in a constant state of fear. As Minneapolis has kind of descended into this lawless wasteland, Walsh has continued to frame federal officers as the problem. After meeting with Holman, Walsh's office released a statement calling for impartial investigations, a reduction of the number of federal agents, and an end to what it described as a campaign of retribution against Minnesota. In other words, Walsh is asking Washington to pull back enforcement while activists continue to openly harass and threat ICE agents. The only person who need to be investigated are the protesters themselves, and particularly who is funding the sophisticated training that is allowing them to dominate the streets with such military precision. As you know, Stephen Miller, who is a deputy chief of staff to the president and charged with the deportation of these illegals, and Vice President J.D. Vance, as well as Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, have all vowed to examine the funding that was flowing to a number of these nonprofit organizations and other left-wing organizations, largely through USAID, which became basically a slush fund for the radical left. USAID, formed by executive order by John F. Kennedy, originally set up to fight communism in this hemisphere by supporting Caribbean, Central, and South American governments fighting the communists, morphed into a massive slush fund, and our tax dollars are being used to fund this so-called Orange Revolution. So now is the time to stand strong. To waver will show political pressure and street protests can intimidate law enforcement and weaken border security. Donald Trump has kept his commitment to close our southern border with no new laws. Remember, Joe Biden constantly told us, well, he would love to do something about this massive invasion going on our southern border, where experts tell me as many as 30 million illegals may have entered the country. We only know that 312 of them are terrorists. My guess is that number is much, much larger. The truth is, we don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. And we don't know how many weapons they brought in with them, not to mention drugs and other illegal contraband. So it is really important here to recognize that while the optics of this are not good, they are a necessity, and they're one of the keys to the 2026 election. The rumors that the president is pulling back is fake news designed to demoralize Trump supporters, in my opinion. As I mentioned before, Tom Homan met with the governor and the mayor, but he went there to lay down the law and make it clear that their actions to embolden ICE protesters won't be tolerated. I know Tom Homan. He is a very tough guy. Now, he describes his meetings with Tim Tim and the radical leftist Mayor Fry. Every other word out of his mouth is the F-bomb. Let us hope that is the case. As I said, I was encouraged by the fact for the first time the Minnesota State Police were backing up ICE, which is a good sign. But the president has not given an inch. His message is clear that elected officials in Minnesota must support law enforcement. They must help us remove criminal offenders, and they must help us restore public safety. Homan did say in a statement that the president has been clear: American citizens must be safe and secure for law-abiding residents, and there will be. That message was predictably met with resistance from the Democrats. Mayor Fry used the meeting to demand an end to Operation Metro Surge, the federal enforcement agent effort launched in December, and reiterated that Minneapolis will not enforce federal immigration laws. So he's doubled down on these sanctuary city policies that have drawn sharp criticism. Governor Walz accused federal authorities of starting the fire. That's not true. And of course, both of them are desperate to distract from the burgeoning financial scandal in Minnesota, in the Somali community, where we now know that hundreds of millions of our tax dollars were ripped off through phony NGOs, phony charities, phony daycare centers, phony COVID programs, phony transportation programs. That money not going to help children or daycare, but going into the pockets of local politicians, and some of that money making its way back to Al-Shabaab, the radical leftist insurgency in Somalia, the ISIS-aligned insurgency. Those are our tax dollars. So Governor Walz is under federal investigation in that matter. The question is, what did he know and when did the governor know it? So it is why he's not running re-election. But at the end of the day, I don't think that he can give in to the president's demands. As I say, the president has the nuclear option here, which nobody wants him to see him do, which is to move the military. There was no lack of enforcement today, and crews were out making arrests as before. We will see how Tim Walz plays this out. But at the end of the day, those who think that Trump has blinked are not paying attention to what's happening on the ground. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone, and we'll be right back with more hot political news.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Well, here we go again. The U.S. Senate has failed to advance a funding package that would prevent a government shutdown that is actually set to begin tomorrow. And of course, Democrats are unsurprisingly once again to blame. In a 55-45 procedural vote, Senate Democrats blocked the advancement of a six-bill funding package because it included financing for the Department of Homeland Security, the very agency tasked with enforcing America's border and immigration law. The measure required 60 votes to proceed, but fell well short after Democrats voted nearly in lockstep against it. Democrats made clear their objection was the DHS funding. So they wanted to do away with all of the immigration enforcement funding at a time when illegal border crossings, cartel activity, and migrant crime continues to overwhelm communities nationwide as the Trump administration makes great progress. The Democrats' refusal to advance the bill underscores their willingness to hold the government hostage to enact their far leftist extremist agenda. Additionally, a handful of fiscally conservative Republicans voted no, citing wasteful spending and pork buried in the bill. Among those were Senators Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, Mike Lee, Rick Scott, Tommy Tuberville, and Ashley Moody. Senate Majority Thune voted against the bill as well, but that was a procedural move that by voting against the bill, it allows him to bring the bill back up. So that was a good sign. But even John Fetterman, who is a Democrat of Pennsylvania, but a man it seems, while not of great sartorial taste, of good public judgment, has publicly argued for keeping the government open and unexpectedly voted against advancing Schumer's move to shut the government down. Senator Mike Lee highlighted the absurdity of the spending priorities, pointing out that taxpayer dollars earmarked for projects like elevator renovations at New York's Metropolitan Opera, an institution with $500 million in the bank, while Democrats are refusing to fund border enforcement, is rather absurd. Another shutdown could be imminent as dysfunctional government in Washington, D.C. proves itself to be an impediment for President Trump's MAGA golden age. I think this is one of the principal reasons the president elected to open up a dialogue with the governor and the mayor. But it is abundantly clear that Chuck Schumer is driven by the radical progressive left wing of his party. He is sweating a potential primary from a Congresswoman AOC of the Bronx, who somehow went from being a bartender to being worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. So it really remains to be seen whether the government will shut down. They're playing chicken with a guy with ice water in his veins. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has announced finally the Department of Justice is fully investigating Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, reigniting long-standing questions about the congressman's finances, her political conduct, and how she got into the United States. It has been demonstrated repeatedly that Ilhan Omar was deeply involved in a fraud, married her own brother in a ruse to get admitted to the country. That is a naturalization fraud, and I believe she could quite legally be deported. But also she is deeply involved in this federal massive welfare fraud. Again, Omar and her now husband, who is not Somalian, go from being worth $420 when she enters Congress to being worth close to $12 million today. So how is that possible? Trump said the Department of Justice and Congress are examining the entire matter, and they promised accountability. An inquiry into Omar's campaign finances, interactions with foreign nationals, had been opened under Biden, but it stalled very quietly. So greater focus on Ilhan Omar. Meanwhile, she appears to have staged some kind of faux assassination event in which a man sprayed her with some liquid, but the whole thing looks very staged and phony to me. And then I wondered what that liquid could be. I guess it could be, I don't know, ham juice. Anyway, I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.